I'm Jason Switzer, Executive Director of the Alberta Clean Technology Industry Alliance and VP Capital for Foresight, Canada's clean tech ecosystem accelerator. I'll be your MC for today. Thank you for joining us for Agtech Meets Energy, a showcase of Alberta's agtech sector. Our goal today is to explore how the agtech and energy sectors can work together to accelerate the development and adoption of innovative technologies that address global challenges such as climate change and feeding 9 billion people, and to showcase our regional agtech community to local, national, and international audiences. A reminder that much of the content today will be recorded so that we can share it with those who are not able to attend via our podcast and other channels. Given that we are gathering today from across Canada, here in Alberta, but virtually, only days after National Indigenous Peoples Day and of the discovery of an unmarked mass grave at a residential school in this area, it's appropriate that we take a moment to acknowledge the traditional lands and land keepers. As the children of immigrants to this country who fled persecution, I'm personally reminded by the change announced yesterday to the Canadian Oath of Citizenship that reconciliation is a national project which involves all of us, and that we have a long way to go. With that in mind, collectively, we acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional and ancestral territory for many peoples, presently subject to Treaties 6, 7, and 8. These are the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, Piguni, and Siksika, the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Alberta. It includes as well the Métis settlements and 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Wherever we are joining from this morning, across Canada or around the world, we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who've lived in and cared for these lands for generations, our traditional knowledge keepers and elders with us today, and those who have gone before. Thank you. Before we jump into the content, which is really why we're all here, let me ask our team to just advance to slide 3, and I'll provide you with some tips and tricks on Hopin, the platform we're using for today's conference. So quickly, a little bit about Hopin. You'll see 3 menus: Stage, which is our plenary room, which is where we are now, Sessions, which are our breakout rooms for smaller groups, and Expo. Expo is a virtual booth, almost an expo-like setting where our partners and ventures, including Innovation Guelph, BLG, as well as the many entrepreneurs that are presenting today, will be hosting booths with materials like videos and document content, as well as it provides you with the opportunity to tap them on the shoulder for a private conversation or a follow-up later. So remember, Stage, Session, or Expo. Stage is the main stage, Session, the breakouts, Expo, the virtual conversations. Over to the next slide, and you'll see that whether you're in event or session determines what you see and who you see. So event, if you send a message in the chat during the event, that'll go to everyone who's attending today. Session is contained just to those people in the breakout. And of course, a personal favorite of mine is using the people function to check to see who else is in the room with you. And in that tab, you're able to tap them on the shoulder for further conversation, if you like. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. The agenda today is pretty packed, I would say, full of great content, starting with, and I should note that all times are in Mountain Time. Right now it's 9:08 a.m. in Calgary. So we'll start with thematic breakouts at 9:15, following our open. Some of the key barriers and opportunities for Canadian agtech ventures. At 9:45, lightning pitches from all the ventures here at the main stage, followed by breakouts, sessions, hosted by each of the startups, in which you'll have a chance to hear a full pitch and undertake a Q&A with them. Come back to the main stage at 10:10 for our all-star panel of investors and practitioners, reflecting on how convergence between energy and ag can be an accelerant for innovation and venture success. At 10:55, a second round of venture pitches featuring the 4 ventures you see there. Again, the lightning round of the 4 ventures pitching, followed by individual breakouts with the ventures. And of course, you can hop around between the ventures at your will. We'll reconvene at the main stage at 11:15 for a keynote from the strategist, spokesperson, and connector Bill Whitelaw of JWN Energy and Geologic Systems, and the formal program will close at 11:35. In all sessions, we'll be collecting questions via the session Q&A tracking content in the chat, and ideally feeding both to your session moderator or to me, your MC. Next slide, please. I'll come back to our sponsors in a moment and thank them properly, but let's go right into, because we're a few minutes behind, let me introduce Jeanette Jackson, CEO of Foresight Canada, for some introductory remarks, and then we'll turn it over to Melinda Park from BLG. Over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you so much, Jason. Welcome, everybody. It's a beautiful sunny morning everywhere in Canada. I'm assuming it's going to be a hot week ahead. And what a better thing to do with our time than talk about ag tech, access to food, ag and energy, and all things that we're seeing be more and more prominent and critical to our path forward, both from a sustainability and food security, water security perspective. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeanette Jackson. I am the CEO of Foresight Canada. As you may have also seen, as of April 1st, Actea has now become a key component or part of Foresight as we continue to navigate our support for Canadian clean tech ventures. If you can open up the slides there, Kurt, that would be great. I'll do a little bit of our spiel, but we're really here to position Canada as a global leader in clean tech innovation. And that really does include ag tech and all the components of transportation, fertilizers, water, and all the components that go into a successful ag tech sector. How we operate is we really bring together the innovation community with industry, investors, government, and academia so that we can set priorities and collaborate on the real issues to reach net zero climate targets and again, ensure food security for all. Our programs and services include our accelerator programming. We do a lot of industry innovation challenges, market research, strategic partnerships. I'm really delighted in particular to talk about our partnerships with Innovate Guelph, in particular for the ag tech space as part of our Ag Next initiative, which I'll review in a moment here. And then of course, cluster building and ecosystem building. How do we break down silos again, so we can pool resources, set priorities, and work together to help us all achieve these net zero climate targets. Next slide. In terms of our impact to date, I'm seeing a few glitches on the slides. I'm sure we'll do a quick check to make sure the rest of the slides don't continue. Overall, the ventures that we've supported to date have $500 million in capital. I'm also delighted to report that the majority of that funding is private capital. So government plays a significant role to kick things off, but the private sector is really stepping up. Company revenue, $230 million. Our economic impact of challenges and jobs created is well over $1 billion. We have supported over 550 ventures since 2015, 6,000 green jobs just from those ventures. And of course, community and partnerships are critical. So both domestic and international partnerships are key to everything that we do. Next slide. So AgriNext, what is it? Today, with the support of BLG and other partners, we have a pretty robust panel series and presentation series, but AgriNext is taking on the same model that we launched with our Water Next initiative, which is pooling together all of the innovators and the other players to showcase Canada's potential in the agri-tech space on a global landscape. And it's intended to be helping to lead the growth of Canada's agri-tech and agri-food industries, including regenerative agriculture, reducing water use, expanding automation and AI, robotics, and of course, reducing pesticides and pollutants. And you will see more about this initiative and how you can get involved over the coming couple of weeks here. Next slide. I won't get into the sessions here. Now I'm going to thank BLG and the Alberta support, ATB, Alberta Innovates, Western Economic Diversification, all for your support. And then without further ado, pass it over to Melinda Gates. Or sorry, Melinda Park. That was a close one there. Melinda Park, Partners, Securities and Capital Markets at Border, Ladner and Gervais, Vice Chair of Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, so SAIT, you may be familiar with. And of course, she graduated from the University of Saskatchewan, and I know she's going to touch on her passion from Saskatchewan and now coming into Calgary, and also a law degree from the University of Toronto, but has since made Calgary her home. Melinda was also a very important recipient last week. He won Calgary Influential Women in Business Award. Congratulations, Park. Thank you for joining us this morning, and over to you.
Thank you. Really appreciate this and look forward to what's going to happen this morning. As mentioned, I am a practicing securities and capital markets lawyer, and I've been doing it for over 25 years. But I think more importantly, I'm really happy to be here on a personal level, and then BLG is very happy to be here as a corporate participant. Agriculture as an industry is one of the oldest in the world, and it is a mainstay, we know that. But with that comes obligation and complexity. And the Canadian agribusiness sector is a key driver of Canada's economy and is deeply woven into our economic and social fabric. I'm a farm girl from Saskatchewan, and I have seen agriculture and what it means to individuals, to communities, and to our country. And I have seen committed people consistently striving to do more, add more, use less, and use better. For some of you, this visual may resonate. I have memories of my dad coming off the field. Some piece of machinery had broken. He would dig around in his machine shed, and inevitably, a few hours later, he would have a solution. It might not be pretty, but it worked. This group of people here today and this event brings that image of being innovative and finding a solution to the next level. Agtech is absolutely the next level. But what I appreciate about the people gathered today is that we have been listening. You have been listening. You have heard or actually dealt with problems, and your creativity and your innovative spirit, so prevalent in Alberta and the Prairies, is striving to find long-term solutions. As mentioned, I'm the vice chair of SAIT, and that is such a wonderful example of bringing together education and innovation. Agriculture and everything that it touches is embedded in our DNA. Agriculture, energy, and Canada go hand in hand. There's so much for Canada to offer the world, and with intertwining of technology, creativity, and expertise, Canada's energy, ag tech, and agribusiness benefit the world. And that's not a casual statement. I really believe that people from Alberta and the Prairies find solutions. We are innovative. I'm excited to be with you here today, along with other BLG colleagues, as we explore how ag tech and energy sectors can work together to build innovative solutions to global challenges. Our global energy landscape is rapidly changing, and we have to have these important conversations. Unlike my dad's low-tech solutions, today we face complexity and speed of change that we've never seen before. With this in mind, BLG is proud to be an active partner with Foresight. And through this partnership with Foresight, we have the valuable opportunity to connect with organizations and leaders in agribusiness to advance solutions across the sector. BLG is proud to be part of the conversation, and I'm confident that by combining our collective expertise here today with everyone, we can accelerate the conversation on ag tech and energy solutions and how we as Canadians continue to be leaders and prepare for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melinda, and thank you, Jeanette, for kicking this off with energy and a bang. We're a few minutes behind, so I'll be very brief. There are now 4 breakout options available. So if you look at the session menu, you will see acquiring and protecting your IP in the ag tech sector with Jason Hugg, National Business Leader for Intellectual Property at BLG. Number 2, soil is a carbon sink with Michael McGee, Director of Innovation at Bioenterprise Canada. Investing in clean tech, topic 3 with Angela Kakali, Venture Fellow at Included VC and a Senior Advisor on Innovation to the Government of Ontario. And finally, Problem-Driven Innovation with Stephen Wilson, VP of Acceleration at Foresight, who will be sharing how to navigate challenges in growing your startup through problem-driven innovation. So with that, I'd encourage you to go to the session menu and pick your session. Let me take a moment to just thank our sponsors one more time. So a sincere thanks to our terrific sponsors, law firm Borden, Ladner Gervais, ATB Financial, who's been a terrific partner to us over several events. And we would also like to acknowledge the ongoing support of Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, and Western Economic Diversification Canada. Now, the thing we're all waiting for, of course, in talking about innovation in ag tech, next slide, please, is the exciting opportunity to present, to hear lightning pitches from a series of ag tech startups from the region. Kicking us off will be Ryan Wright, CEO of New Leaf Farms, and we'll reshuffle slightly. Vinter, Maxim will go fifth. With that, knowing that we've only got about a minute each for each of our presenters to do their lightning pitch, we'll then go into individual breakouts with the ventures. So again, select from the session menu following our opening pitch, and you'll have an opportunity to hear a full pitch and interact in a Q&A with the ventures, with us returning back to the main stage at 10:10 for our Ag Tech Meets Energy panel. So with that, folks, Ryan, over to you. Let's turn on your camera and kick off the first of 4 or 5 presentations. Thanks, Ryan.
Good morning. Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Wright, and I'm one of the founders of a Calgary-based company, New Leaf Farms. At New Leaf, we're creating a sustainable food future through the development and engineering of vertical farm operations. In Canada, we depend on importing roughly $10 billion a year in fresh fruits and vegetables to feed our communities. To get that food from our farm to our dinner plates, we rely on a complex network that are often inefficient and extract a massive toll on our environment. By combining plant science with automation, we are targeting a $550 million a year segment of the vegetable market with our turnkey indoor platform, converting warehouses into highly efficient year-round sources of fresh food and local jobs. Utilizing the experience of our province's 2 keystone industries, energy and agriculture, our Made in Alberta solution provides a scalable, measurable impact on both food security and sustainability goals. Currently, we're building strategic partnerships throughout the province and to advance our net zero solution and continue to grow New Leaf's, continue to grow tomorrow's future today. Thank you.
I'm the CEO of Soilgenic, and our intensified green ammonia technology will reduce CO2 emissions by 500 million tons, while reducing the production cost by 3 times over other green ammonia technologies. Our decentralized green ammonia from renewable or carbon-based energy will play a significant role in the $11 trillion hydrogen energy economy. Our vision is to reduce CO2 emissions and environmental impact by implementing climate-smart technologies for agriculture and energy. Thank you.
Thank you. And now over to Karen Shute, CEO of Livestock Water Recycling. Welcome back, Karen.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I have 60 seconds to get you excited about manure. So I'm going to start off by saying a dairy farm with only 700 cows can produce as much liquid waste as the city of Red Deer. And we know that liquid waste has created a lot of value. Our unique plant technology processes, treats, and digitizes that waste. From manure liquids, we create valuable concentrated natural fertilizers, concentrated feedstock for renewable natural gas, and clean potable water. A complete package for farms to unlock all the value in their manure lagoons. Our clients are protein producers and biogas producers across 10 states into the UK and the Middle East that are looking to reduce manure management costs, increase their herd size, double their biogas production, and increase their productivity on farm. We're recycling 1 billion gallons of manure this year and looking to grow that into 1 trillion. Thank you.
5 seconds left. And now let me ask Mark Olson of Flock Systems to join us. Over to you, Mark. And Karen, you can jump to the session if you like.
Thank you. Thank you. Flock Systems, Flock is a handheld device for digitization of livestock management. Livestock production, particularly cow-calf, is a $9 billion industry in Canada, but there's little digitization. Even those producers who do use some sort of automation end up using pen and paper at the animal side. It has urgent need for digitization. Current practices are fine as long as the data is on the increasingly need detailed information about the livestock. Flock is unique in that it was born on a ranch. It started from identified needs, and we've worked with producers to come up with today operations. Flock is herd management and traceability where it belongs, at the herd. Thank you very much, and I look forward to getting into detail.
Welcome back to Agtech Meets Energy, and I am really privileged to welcome a star-studded panel here. Welcoming back Melinda Park from BLG, but joining us is Sasha Musi, Director of Agribusiness Market Development at ATB. He's focused on developing new markets within agribusiness and agri-food. He and his collaborators work to find creative solutions that enable these businesses to launch and expand. Joining us as well as Ingrid Fung, Investment Director with Finisterre Ventures in Toronto. She spent the last decade in agtech and entrepreneurship, including holding roles in business development, strategic advisory, technology development, and venture capital. A scientist and an advocate for public science communication and for diversity and inclusion in STEM. Ingrid is an advisor to several accelerators. She's on several venture boards. And a particular interest for her, if I may, is the application of health tech in the ag sector. Joining us well, Jason Bradley, who is diversity of experience in action in the ag tech sector, having held senior roles in tech, in cattle ranching, and in venture acceleration, including as VP of operations at the Red Deer River Ranches, a senior role at Nortel Networks, and today the director and manager of Smart Ag at Olds College, where he developed the Smart Farm, a training and testbed facility for innovation in ag tech. Welcome all. Great to have you here. Just a reminder, that ag tech is a very hot space right now. We've seen some exciting venture successes here in Alberta, including the acquisition of Decisive Farming, a kind of data platform play in ag tech by TELUS Ventures. Future Fields, the first Alberta-based ag tech, clean tech company to graduate from Y Combinator, invested in recently by Robert Downey Jr. Yes, they're backed by Iron Man. Now, my economics prof at McGill back in the mid-90s said that we eat fossil fuels. And according to WRI, the World Resources Institute, the global ag sector accounts for roughly 13% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And these emissions are projected to increase by 15% by 2030 to 7 gigatons per year. But this is to meet a growing global population of nearly 9 billion people or so by 2030, 10 billion by 2050. People who are wealthier and better fed. Obviously, we can't achieve net zero and grow the ag sector in the way that we've grown it in the past. We know that Alberta has been a place where agricultural offsets have been a big driver of innovation. We've transacted almost 16 megatons of carbon offsets here. So what's unique globally about Alberta? How can we leverage the experience of growing a global energy sector and ag sector who are in close proximity together? What are the opportunities through convergence, esteemed panel? What do we have to seize on to leverage this opportunity? So format, I'll give you each 3 to 4 minutes to share your thoughts, as well as close with a challenge, a question that we can bandy about as a panel following, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And with that, let me turn it over to Jason. Why don't you kick us off?
So as I think about this space of the convergence between energy and ag, it's, first of all, it's in our Albertan DNA, whether you have been here for a few years or a few generations, where those two industries have seemed to be knitted together, but not always in a way that has taken advantage of the technology and the experience and the expertise being able to be converged. So when I think about what's happened in the last maybe decade in energy, there's been immense stakeholder and shareholder pressure to create energy in a different way. Let me put it that way. So to achieve the same thing but together as two industries, when I think about soil carbon cycling and sequestration, it takes a paradigm shift in thinking in both energy creation and in primary agriculture production. So those two things have to happen, and we have to figure out how to channel that stakeholder and shareholder pressure. Sometimes I think personal opinion, sometimes I think it might be misdirected, and we need to revector that in some of the right places. So there's sort of three things I focus on, and I challenge some of the startups and folks I work with, is the technology or business model that you're working with, is it directed at solutions that are additive instead of extractive when it comes to functional soil health? So it's helpful to answer that question. How is the technology of the company actually creating value, and for whom? Where does that value come from, and who is it for? For example, is it driving functional soil health? Is it improving nutrient density of food? Is it creating increased profitability for farmers? And sort of the third thing is there a real increase in functional soil health? Is it improving the nutrient density of food, like I said? Is it achieving those things? So my question would be, how can we create a more purposeful platform, and how do we support projects for the exchange of knowledge and experience and technological innovation between the energy and ag sectors?
Melinda, over to you.
I'm too busy writing notes with everything that Jason has said. That's really good. I'm going to layer on top of that what Jason has said, which is, if we are going to be in a convergence, that by definition means things are coming together, how do entities that have creative ideas, have a reason for change making, how do they do that in a way that actually is the value add that everybody aspires it to be? We've been talking a little bit about how complex the space can be. We've talked about how fast moving it is. In my opening remarks, I talked about the speed of change. Like, it is like nothing we've ever seen before. So if you're going to invest all of this energy, how do you actually make sure it turns into something that's accretive for you, accretive for your community, and is something that's worth fighting for? My lens is through the legal lens, and my lens is through, how does a startup ensure it sets itself up for success? If you're talking about the speed of change, you don't have time in a year or 3 to consider, oh gee, now's the time to kind of set this up right. By then, your opportunity has sailed right on by you, and other really accretive opportunities went to somebody else because you couldn't catch up, you weren't ready, or you just didn't even know it was around because you didn't have the proper base set up. So I think, again, if we go to the lens of change and rapid change, you have to set yourself up right away. So for me, that's having a can-do attitude, having a potential value add only means something if the 1 + 1 turns into 3. And my question to you is, how do you ensure your 1 + 1 doesn't just turn into 1.1? Because that's just not interesting for anybody. And how do you ensure that lingo like ESG, what does that even mean? Greenwashing, how do we know that all of this is relevant to us? And if it is, how it is? So for me, there's 2 questions. Who you partner with is very important when you're looking at the convergence of ideas, but how you partner is just as important. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. How do you develop your business plan? How do you hold true to your goals? That's who you're partnering with as much as it is how you're going to partner. Who is on your board? Who takes the time to hold you accountable as the management team, as the inventor, as the one who's striving for change? You need that package all sitting there so that with rapid change, you can rapidly go through the change. That's me.
Thanks, Melinda. And a great close with
Uh-oh. If Jason's frozen, Sasha, do you want to?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, happy to kick in, Jason. If you can hear us, I'll just kick in and cut in whenever you do come in. But I'll take it one level kind of higher as we look at it. When we think about innovation in agriculture or ag tech, food tech, I think for me it's about addressing industrial problems. And that's how I actually look at it. And that's where the convergence becomes really apparent to me, is if we look at, industrial problems and industrial solutions, that's what we're talking about today. If we're talking about energy production, manufacturing, waste management, distribution and logistics, or storage, you can put food and bio on the beginning of each one of those statements. And I think that's the big thing as we look at it from an ATB perspective, and through my personal experience, we see those solutions, and how do we drive solutions for some of these industry challenges, whether that's GHG, carbon, or just plainly efficiency, for operational reasons. And while we see the overlap of these opportunities across the sectors, I think the key thing for me, as I look at it from a financial lens, is the economics of it. Well, how viable is it? It is great to get tied up on, the socioeconomic and the environmental rah-rah behind it, I guess I could say, but we need to make sure that it actually has strong financial wherewithal, so it provides the impact that everybody hopes for. And so that's the big thing that I start to focus in on, is when we start to look at it, a lot of these opportunities come to us, and they don't always understand their addressable market. They talk about 9.5 billion people in the next 10 years and these big numbers, and the protein market's this big globally, yet we're not even making fractionated proteins in the country to service the country, right? So we need to start to think about that addressable market. And I think that often, for me, leads to what I always say, the banker versus the investor discussion. And I'm very fortunate in my role, given that I'm in this market development position where I play with collaborators, investors, and our own financial institution. I get to see both of these, but more often than not, most people just come at us with an investor discussion. And I won't take too much of that lens, because Ingrid, that is a lane much better than me. But often everybody's selling me on upside. And from a financial institution perspective, we're thinking about debt service. How does a company service a debt? Doesn't have to be right away. No, there's ways to work around that. But ultimately, you need to be able to pay yourself, and you need to be able to pay the debt, so that you can hopefully continue to provide the impact that your company is aiming to provide. So I think that's the big thing for me. When my two questions to the audience at the end of the day comes, who is your audience that you're speaking to, and how well do you know them? I think that's the first question that comes off. And then the second is, what is your real addressable market? If we're looking at this opportunity from an economic perspective out of the gate, we really need to understand that core market, the market that's going to start to pull you off of your commercial opportunity and into a scaling opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, Sasha. Well, Ingrid, the challenge has been laid. What is the investor perspective on the opportunity at the intersection between energy?
I think there's a lot of really interesting intersections between energy and ag, not just on the technology side, but really on the scaling and financing side. And I think the important question that, Sasha hit right on the head is, can your technology or your offering be monetized and really be financially sustainable? So we talk a lot about sustainability from the environmental, social governance, ESG side, from the perspective of wanting to be softer and kinder to the environment. But in order for these things to be rolled out at scale and make the impact that they're intended to make, they also need to be financially sustainable. And as an investor, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, opportunities and companies that, yes, we're providing the capital for you to grow and to scale, but you have a line of sight to, one, similar to what Jason said, creating value that really makes sense for your end user, and two, to making money, right? The reality is that, we talk about money like it's a bad thing sometimes, but it's a proxy for value. So if you're creating value, you should, in theory, be able to monetize it. And you have to take a look at, the models you're going after, if they make sense from a financial sustainability perspective. So if, you're only, as Melinda said, making the farmer break even after spending money on your solution, they're putting in a lot of work for doing that. And similar on the energy side. So while a lot of opportunities may seem like they really, really make sense, you need to be creating monetizable value. So my question to, a lot of the entrepreneurs here today is, really take a hard look at the model that you're going after and point out how it can become financially sustainable to both yourself and the end user. And then the other piece I would say, where there's a lot of really interesting convergence, where I think particularly on the ag side, that we can learn a lot from the energy industry is around, financing models that make sense. So as a venture investor, I'm looking for a particular scale of growth and return that may or may not make sense for every type of technology that applies in ag and energy. But certainly in the energy space, they have things like, tillings, project finance, equipment financing, things that we're starting to see converge and come into the ag side as we're taking a look at energy sustainability with an agricultural lens. So, a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack, but certainly a lot of things we can borrow from the energy industry to commercialize things on the ag side.
Great. Well, and it occurs to me that in finance we often talk about three buckets, really: grants, debt, and equity. And I think there's a real opportunity to go a little deeper on that question. But just to summarize, then, so several questions here. Number one, how are you actually adding value to producers? Number two, who do you partner with and how, in a way that keeps you true to your goal and mission? Number three, who is your audience, and what is your true addressable market? So not all the tea in China, but really the market you can actually reach. And I guess fourth, how are you monetizing it in a way that's relevant to your investor, if I can? So why don't we tackle that? And maybe to kick us off, I'll give it back to Sasha to lead it.
Well, that's a lot to unpack in one go. I'll pick up on one piece. I guess two different things that kind of resonate for me. I think the partnership thing is really important. We see lots of opportunities, especially in the last year. COVID's been really interesting on the lens toward the food industry. And so when I talk about food, I'm talking about pre-farm right through to the end. It's the full value chain, right? And that's how I think a lot of people started looking at it as a result of COVID. Similarly, we saw the energy companies also looking at this and understanding how there's a correlation between the work that everybody is doing, whether it's agriculture using energy or agriculture playing a role in sequestering some of the issues that energy provides and whatnot. And I think collaboration is going to be something that's really important here. We don't typically see, or at least the trend that I've been noticing, especially in the last decade, is we're not seeing as much of this innovation happen within big corporates. So you're not going to see energy players getting into the ag space solely on their own with their own group. They're going to look at different partners. They're going to look at different innovations that are already out there and figure out how to commercialize and scale with them. Again, monetizing is really important here for those partnerships in a lot of ways, but in some ways out of the gate, it's really about making a more positive impact, and then the economics will flow behind it. I think Ingrid also brought up a good point around what we can learn from the energy industry. And this is something that's been really challenging, but around that financial support, project finance, equipment finance, this feels really new. A lot of this industry has been around, but at the end of the day, it's the equipment and the projects that are very new. And if we look at project finance from an energy perspective, it's typically attached to a strong power purchase agreement or some type of long-term monetizable agreement on the back end of this. Food doesn't always work that way. We're definitely seeing that grow out more and more. But if we just look at it from a food manufacturing perspective, the retailers aren't signing POs. They're asking you to pay for shelf space. That's a really interesting anomaly that's different than maybe in the energy play, but we're starting to see the retailers pull more product, or vice versa. If we go upstream into agriculture, we start to see more and more POs around the equipment and stuff like that. So as we see more of that come on, I think you'll see the financial institutions become more comfortable with the process and start to get behind it. Now it's on institutions like ATB to start to figure that out, and that's something that I think we've really started to recognize here in the last year.
Well, historically, the margin on agricultural products has not kind of come back to the producers. So I guess going back to Jason's question about creation of value, let's go back to you, Jason. How do you kind of construct a business that delivers value to your end user that is monetizable?
So we talk about supply chain a lot in all different sectors, right? And in agriculture, it's no different. There's a supply chain that goes from upstream to sort of in that middle and then all the way downstream. So when I think about how do you add value, let's even think about, we're think it's been mentioned a few times already, or in the green room, we were talking about, you know, oil going back to $100 a barrel. It's at 75. And as a province, it doesn't take very long for that to be the headline story in our news feed. So, but so how do we create value? So let's say oil does go back to that, and there's a lot of capital flowing through that market. But on the ag side, and in terms of the ag supply chain, how do we make sure that value gets attributed back to the landowner, to the person who took all the risk and did all the work to grow the food that goes down that supply chain? So, Ingrid, you talked about, you know, money's not a bad thing; it's a proxy for value. So, how about carbon as a proxy for value? So if we look at that the same way and say, well, how do we then get value? How do we attribute value back? Because the value chain actually should go back up the supply chain. And so how do we make sure that the landowner that took that risk, that did the work, gets the value attributed back to them by being able to look at the value of carbon in the soil and to measure that, to quantify it, to verify it, and then allow that to be exchanged as well. So when we look at this convergence between energy and ag, it's actually almost, it should be obvious to us that we need to create these purposeful convergences of the technology and the experience to ensure that the value gets attributed to the right place, and that as we add value, that the value is actually being seen added to the soil. Because in essence, if you think of fossil fuel, that's where it came from in the first place. So that's where we have to get the value back into. And that sounds like kind of a big esoteric argument, but if you're a farmer, your land is more valuable, it's more productive, it provides more ecological goods and services when you have a higher carbon content in your soil. So to me, carbon is like the apex measurement in agriculture. And I think that we can look at that convergence and adding value back to the producer in that sense.
Thank you. Well, that's and I note in the chat a really interesting point that the largest growth opportunity in ag may be to reduce the 1/3 of ag output that's currently lost along the value chain. Melinda, over to you. How would you answer this question around monetization of benefits and financing?
Well, I think what I would say is that management, especially in startups, is so focused on one foot in front of the other and is so focused on how to make that internal value add, whether it's not getting the patent, if it's technology based, or if it's patentable, if it's agriculture for sure. Again, I said in my opening comments, I grew up as a farm girl. I know the 14 hours a day, 18 hours a day, and I don't think that's changed, even though things have scaled. So if you're actually going to monetize, and if you think you're going to be in a way that step by step by step is accretive, because you're growing when you're monetizing, is that you have to layer on top of your management roles the people who pull their heads up, look at what's going on and adapt, but force you along that. As counsel for 25 years, I don't know how many times we've seen really great management teams never pull their head up, never kind of understand what's going around them. And then by the time they think they're ready to monetize, it's gone. Like, it's completely irrelevant. Somebody beat them to it. Everybody else is partnered, and they're looking around going, but look at what we've got. And yet no one's interested anymore. And so when you said, Jason, that there were these three buckets, you mentioned grants, debt, equity. We've talked about what management would be looking for in order to use those. You may take yourself out of really good equity coming from Ingrid if you went into a relationship with Sasha and ATB at your second stage, but they don't live together well. That may be fine, but you shouldn't be making that decision without understanding what's happening. And management most often does not have the capacity, not the capability, but the capacity to do everything that it needs to do. So I'm going to keep pushing everybody on good governance, on putting people around you, on building a board that can actually do that for you. Because you can't monetize if you can't see, one, that there's a market for it anymore, that there's a partner who could have taken you to the next level, or three, that there were opportunities out there that you actually should not have taken. And sometimes a good board is telling you to hold tight, stay true to where you are. I think Sasha even mentioned you're not chasing the shiny object, which if you don't have time to consider everything, you start going all over the place. I can't stress this part hard enough or long enough.
Thank you. Well, Ingrid, it comes full circle back to you now. As the investor looking at, famously, I think Marty Reed told me that he looks at 200 ventures before he selects one. I don't know if that's consistent with your experience, but, in looking at the ventures that have come through your door, what are some of the models that are making sense to you in terms of addressing the challenges that Melinda, Jason, and Sasha have flagged?
So Melinda's certainly I've definitely come across, all of these issues when looking at startups, right? The startup that we can't get involved in because they've, decided to take on debt that, we really don't want to repay, but their lender, requires them to repay by a certain date. The startup that, really has missed the opportunity because they haven't looked at long-term strategic value, and the one that, may be looking at trying to monetize something that's 10 years out. And I think that's something that we really need to nail down on here, particularly when we're talking about sustainability and the convergence of energy and ag. One of the things we've struggled with the most at Finisterre is around all of the excitement and exuberance around ag as a sustainability investment tool, but not really getting a good feel as to when the rubber is really going to hit the road on things like, a fully scaled carbon market. It really, when we've done things like dig into how carbon credits are issued right now, they're really done on practices, not really on inputs. And so there's a lot of work to be done on the early stage innovation side to create that actual value and that measurement tool piece. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the startup structuring side earlier on, around paying attention to, what's coming up the line. And Melinda is absolutely right. This is something, this is a role that your board members can play, right? They can kind of gut check you when you have your quarterly board meetings around, look, here are some trends that we see playing out. You don't necessarily have to address them now, but you need to have a high level plan as to how you fit into these macro trends that are coming. Absolutely focus on your day-to-day, how you're building value, how you're monetizing your product for your immediate customer and your serviceable market in the next, 18 to 24 months. But you need to know how you fit in that broader sustainability story as it's coming through. And around this piece in particular, funny enough, for tech companies, we've actually found business model innovation and partnerships innovation being the most important tool to having a role to play and being able to be impactful in this. So you may be a startup that has, an incredible technology that results in carbon sequestration, but you cannot capture that value or deliver it to your customer alone. And so building relationships along the value chain that allow you to secure everything from a grower contract to preferred pricing at processing. These types of innovations are really important. One thing I would highlight specifically within the ag space that's, a little bit frustrating, especially for innovation adoption, is the fact that our supply chain across agri-food in general is really, really fragmented and each piece of the supply chain is optimized towards being super efficient and really, really good at doing something different, right? So for example, your seed companies have been breeding optimizing on yield, not necessarily on nutritional densification. And so while you're getting massive yield increases over time, the quality of the product you're producing is actually lower, particularly for large acreage row crops like soy and corn. You're actually getting, you may be getting increases in oil, but you're getting decreases in protein and so forth. Your processor that your farmer then sells these products to price on protein and oil. And so figuring out how to build partnerships across the supply chain that enable you to optimize for the things that matter down the line are super important. So I would say, having a board that understands where things are going from a macro trends perspective, as well as taking a look at not just your technology development, but what you can do on the business model innovation side that will help your customer. Super important to being successful in the future as we start to focus on sustainability across the supply chain.
I think that model, that comment about business model innovation is critically important. We're seeing some real successes in the hardware as service model in a number of areas in clean tech. One criticism of Alberta has been that the focus on the energy sector has kind of crowded out opportunities for what someone in the chat called courageous public funding for courageous demonstrations. And that emphasis on the energy sector at the expense of the ag sector has meant that some of these opportunities have just not moved forward. There's also an early stage investment gap in Canada that is a particular barrier for ventures to kind of scale to a meaningful size when they become actionable by folks like Ingrid and Sasha. I wonder, panelists, if you'd care to comment on that, and maybe I'll start with Jason.
Yeah, I'm wanting to go back to what Ingrid talked about in terms of that nutrient densification comment that you made, and how in the sector we get really good at in a very narrow sense at getting good at what we're doing in that sector, and it's the same in energy and as it is in agriculture, and what happens when we do that is we end up being very much along the industrial production model where we've broken things down and gotten very good at certain things at the expense of, you talked about, nutrient densification. So I just wonder how we can do a better job between the sectors at creating a healthier ecosystem. So when you think about from a crop point of view, when we have many different crops and many different animals working together in some sort of fashion to increase the nutrient density and nutrient health of soil, how can we do the same thing in terms of that supply chain so that it actually you talked about partnerships. So how do we mimic in the supply chain, and partnerships I think is a good way, but that there is more collaboration across the supply chain and in between the different sector supply chains, the same way that there should be that synergy when we look at, I would say, instead of the industrial production model of a monoculture crop, the value of synergy that happens between growing many different varieties together and many different ways of interacting plants and animals together. So again, that's that high level sort of how do we do that? But we have to mimic that in both in the finance and the economics as much as we do in the biological part of that nature-based system.
So Jason, I would say, we start with not necessarily dismantling the whole kind of industrial system that we have right now, but we start with understanding kind of what your protein producer is looking for when they're purchasing, soy meal, or who's buying, the products of your customer, right? And you start to build those relationships and you start to have those conversations, which, insanely enough, are not commonly had in ag, like kind of these cross-segment discussions. And even so for example, I'll use the example of one of our portfolio companies, ZCal. It's literally a soy company that improves photosynthesis, increases carbon capture, and transfers that into protein and oil, right? This is like a very tangible example. I would say up until 12 months ago, this company was really, really focused at, being purchased in a trade sale potentially by one of the large seed companies. COVID kind of shut all of that potential down because everybody started looking inward. And so one of the things, the board advised the CEO to do was to start having conversations with their customer's customer, understanding what the value of the products that they're creating are for those groups. And we got a ton of excitement from proteins producers at the idea of having more sustainable inputs, because this is something that they can go market to food companies they sell to now. And so just starting with having those small conversations around what the value that your technology has or your technology creates is for not just the person you're trying to sell to, but their customer. That's really, really important. It's a relatively small step. And then you can also kind of go in the opposite direction further up the value chain and go, okay, so carbon credits are coming down the line at some point. What do I need to be doing now in my field trials that I'm running anyways? What additional testing can I layer in, which then makes sense for the carbon issuance companies later on, maybe 5 years from now, to incorporate this information in. And so it's reaching both further up the value chain and down the value chain for these conversations, instead of being, as Melinda said, heads down, focused just on your specific piece. I think once we solve like that small barrier, we can then go in and have these conversations around, okay, now how do we get everybody who's already talking now to work better together to focus on this soil health piece, and then, you know, communicate that to the consumer who really is, whose preferences really are driving a lot of what's going on, and what we're talking about today.
So get your thinking and doing out of your silo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get it, move it out. That is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a really fine line, because I think there's 2 points to this, right? There's understanding your value chain, and I'll come back to the value piece of that, and knowing what's happening on both sides of it, but then not chasing shiny coins. And that was the one comment that, you know, Melinda and I were kind of talking about before this. And you know, I think about 2 examples. So agriculture, synonymous for just running in its own silos. I think that's been beaten into the head here right now. It just loves to operate in silos, do what I do really well. But then there's talk about the value chain or the supply chain, the full supply chain. And it's a matter of understanding the value you can provide on both sides of that. And so, you know, 2 examples where we've kind of seen this succeed. One less so focused on maybe the convergence of ag and energy, but, you know, around traceability. So everybody thought about food traceability, and, well, you know what, the consumer wants to know more, so the consumer's going to pay for it, not the option. Like that's not how it goes. So as traceability companies started to get more engaged, they started to integrate with this full supply chain, talk to everybody along the line, from the farm through to the distribution, to the value adder, to the retail, and they realized there was tons of inefficiencies because of those silos. Once we started to understand what inefficiencies, so let's say it's just in distribution, and this one does kind of hit home, is that, you know, we've got a lot of trucks running around half full. Well, that is just inefficient on so many different levels, not to mention on the environmental side. So as we start to track this more, we can start to figure out those efficiencies and plug it in. Again, I was a tech company thinking about just data, but I realized that I could drive some type of innovation down to the transporter at this point. So there's one example. The other side is on the waste upcycling side of things. I think and I'm cautious, very cautious, Ingrid, don't pin me up against the wall on this, around biofuels. I'm not going to get super bullish on biofuels, but if we look at biofuels, some of the things that have been coming up, you know, ethanol is an interesting example, and we know corn's the biggest input for that, but there's been opportunities where we see other inputs into ethanol production that have a very high value waste product or byproduct at the end of it. Specifically, in this case, it's sometimes proteins. And so how do I, you know, I'm an energy player, but I've got this waste product that's costing me money, but it's actually valuable to the food industry. Again, get out of your silos. So talk to each other, get an understanding of what's going on. And so that can go within the value chain of agriculture as much as it can across the 2 segments of energy and agriculture. You need to break down those silos, have a discussion, figure out what your core business is, and understand if there's value above or up the stream or down the stream from where you are. But don't just chase everything that's sitting there. Don't just chase it because it's an ESG mandate. Chase it because there's actual value in that supply chain.
Well, I see we've had some really interesting conversations so far, and just to summarize some of the takeaways that I saw, you know, value to the customer of your customer. So going down your value chain. We talked about financing models from energy and some of the innovation there that could be brought into the ag tech space, including, you know, leveraging debt against your assets, your purchase orders, monetization of carbon credits. We talked about the importance of understanding the use case for producers in terms of soil health, productivity, and the need to get out of your soil, out of your silo. Sorry, not the soil. And then Sasha's cautionary tale around making sure you don't just chase shiny objects, but instead really focus on those areas that can deliver real value that's monetizable as part of the business. I guess a final question then, and there's been some discussion around in the chat and Q&A around this, is really, you know, the technology domains that are the most interesting. And the markets, you know, is energy a market for carbon offsets? Is data the play silo, as you said, on logistics? What are the areas, Ingrid, that we're gonna see tremendous innovation in through this tremendous investment in health sciences coming out of COVID? You know, what's next?
Yeah, so I mean, full disclosure, I'm a molecular biologist by training, so I tend to lean towards the biology side for a number of reasons, right? One, you know, you don't have the capital investment that you need to have on the sensors and hardware side those are really, really tough business models to build out. Biology, you can almost have a software like model where, you know, whatever trait, whatever product you're developing, it can go to market through someone else's hardware, which is seed and germplasm and things like that, right? So still really bullish on plant sciences. I'm pretty bullish on crop inputs. A lot of the discovery platforms that we've seen really be successful on the human health side for discovering new actives, we're now taking those, porting them over and applying them in ag discovery. And that's incredibly exciting. We're seeing a lot of computational power come to solve ag problems as well, and taking a look at early stage risk mitigation for discovery. So really bullish on that front. You know, aside from the biology piece, really interested in seeing what's playing out on the business model innovation side. I think, you know, we've been looking really, really global over the last couple of decades. I think COVID's kind of forced us to look a little bit smaller and closer to home over the last year. And that opens the opportunity for, you know, building out small, very profitable businesses that look regionally, you know, whether that's North America as a region, whether that's Alberta and, you know, Western Canada as a region. Tons of opportunity to innovate on that front.
Great. Jason, last word, then Sasha, then Melinda, and then we'll wrap.
So I'm just thinking some of those questions that you asked Jason about, you know, is energy a market for carbon offsets? Absolutely. I'm not the only one saying it, but we can't get to net zero by only reducing emissions. We as a society need energy, right? Especially in Canada, because it's cold a lot of the year. And so we need ways to heat our homes and to move things around. So energy is absolutely a market for carbon offsets, which means that the need for us to figure out how to share technology and how to purposely create this convergence. So not to let it just happen, but to actually design and implement that convergence is key. And then I think about the technologies in ag tech, for instance, and a lot of the, you know, there's so much focus right now on measuring what we're doing, whether it's through, you know, soil or plants or earth-based observation, precision agriculture, those types of things. So those technologies are key to help producers understand where they can be more efficient, where they can be more profitable. And it doesn't matter necessarily what type of agriculture production, conventional, organic, sustainable, regenerative, like they all have their own place, I guess I would say. And the technologies should be driving that soil health and the profitability for farmers within that primary production context. And I think about, just maybe in summary, the third way. What's the third way of agriculture production that those technologies can help to enhance, so that there's a convergence even of how we grow foods, as well as the convergence between the sectors?
Thanks, Jason. Sasha.
Sorry, just writing furiously here, because I think all these are really good points, and want to be mindful of not being redundant, but to build off of this. And I think, you know, everything that's been said is right on point as we look at the convergence and the understanding of the carbon markets and how they can play together. I think this is going to become more important. Jason, a plug for you. I think you even mentioned our organization, ATB, on a carbon market play and kind of what our interests are, right? And I can't speak to that necessarily, but I think you know, as we look at this, there's value in that carbon market. It hasn't really been built out, so we need to understand that. There's likely a direct impact to the financing model, both on the investor and then just more traditional financing. So we need to continue to look down that path and see how do we also not operate in our own silo. You know, how do we integrate in this? The data that's coming off the farm, the data that's coming out of these different platforms are really beneficial for the farmer at the end of the day, and we play a key role in that. I definitely see that. You know, if I start to think about what's next and what are the opportunities, one of the things that we maybe didn't touch on too much here, but is controlled environment agriculture, indoor farms. I'm going to give a quick shout out to New Leaf and Ryan Wright over at New Leaf. You know, there's a lot of opportunity for industrial innovation to come into that space, everything from process through to carbon sequestration. And so I think we're going to see more and more there. We're ripe for good opportunity because of where energy's at and how that can collaborate. Nutrition, I'm glad that Ingrid brought that up. I think that's a really important piece. I think we've kind of lost sight on that a little bit. It's become really big from a consumer level, but we need to make sure our science is focusing in on that. And then the last thing I'll say is quickly around sustainability in the process and sustainability in the economics. I fully appreciate sustainability from are we doing what's best for the environment? But again, we can only do what's best for the environment if we can afford to do it. So we need to have both those in play. And I think that's really important.
Thank you, Sasha. And Melinda, last word.
Really quick, you're not too early stage. Early stage, throw that word out the window. If you wait too long, you're going to miss whatever it is that you were intending to do. So put yourself in a place for success, and you can only do that if I said before, it's not capability, it's capacity. So ensure as the management team, as the owner, as whatever it is that you hold that role, build around you proper board, good governance, because when you're ready to go, and when other people and your partners are ready to go, you got to make sure those align. So that's just really good information to help what Ingrid needs, what Jason is talking about, and what Sasha would be looking for. So do that.
Do that. And with that, this panel I declare closed. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ingrid. What a great, engaging panel. And I got to say, the prep call was a lot of fun too. I wish we could have kept going for another hour. But on this note, thank you all for your time this morning. We're going to go on break for a few minutes and let our lightning pitcher ventures get ready. So we'll restart at 11:01. So 11 o'clock for those of you who are ready to come back. And then immediately following the lightning pitches, we'll again go into sessions, breakouts, with the ventures so that you can have one-on-one time or small group time with the entrepreneurs and ask them questions. So thank you to my tremendous panel, and thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back at 11.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good job, Jason.
Welcome back. We have the remaining 4 of our terrific lineup of ventures pitching, sharing their pitches with you. The format again is a brief elevator pitch from each of the ventures, followed by roughly 15-minute breakouts hosted by each of our entrepreneurs, in which they'll give a longer pitch and engage in Q&A. You can move around to different venture sessions at any time using the session menu. And again, it's the session menu that you'll use to select the breakout. And then we'll return to the stage at 11:20 for concluding keynote from Bill Whitelaw. So with that, actually, I'm going to just make the amendment on the fly that it'll be 11:25 that will come back. With that, let me turn it over to Alex Villeneuve of Series Solutions. You have 1 minute, Alex. Go.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for having me. I'm Alex Villeneuve. I'm the founder of Series Solutions. We're a modular mushroom farm that's 8.8 times more efficient per square foot than a standard cultivation method for mushrooms. We use the agricultural byproducts and spent beer brewer's grain, which is a byproduct of the craft beer brewing industry, as a substrate to grow our mushrooms. We grow the mushrooms off of this waste product. We sell them to local restaurants and farmers markets, and then as a result of the mushroom growing process, our leftover mushroom compost and our what would traditionally be viewed as a waste in a regular mushroom farm is actually enhanced with protein by the mushrooms, and it's we're the first company in North America to have a mushroom-based animal feed product approved. So we generate value through 3 industries: for breweries by offering a economical removal service, for restaurants and chefs by offering a low-cost and high-quality mushroom product, and then for farmers and ranchers with our enhanced cattle feed product, bringing it into a zero waste and sustainable loop. We just closed a $1.5 million financing round. It took us 11 days, and we're building a demonstration farm in Crossfields, Alberta later this year. Yeah, that's the company. If you want to learn more, we're not seeking financing right now, but we're looking for folks who may be interested in participating in our Series A round in about a year. I'd like to be part of our investor community to receive updates.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. With that, let me hand it over to Rob Lavoie, CEO of Airterra. Rob?
Thank you for this opportunity to share the Airterra vision. Alberta has a long reputation for producing high-quality forest and agricultural products. We are also recognized for our abundant hydrocarbon resources. However, we face significant challenges with many mining sites and oil gas leases needing to be reclaimed right now, and an excess carbon emissions needing to be reduced. We could make use of our forests and agricultural land to help resolve these issues. Airterra and the partners of the Mico Ranch project plan to demonstrate how soils can be returned to health and be a beneficial carbon sink to mitigate emissions while also creating a low carbon renewable energy future. Biochar is a high carbon content product manufactured by the thermochemical conversion of residual biomass, and Airterra's business plan includes sales of biochar, enhanced soil mediums, renewable natural gas or electricity, and their associated carbon credits. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, look forward to finding out more about Airterra and series in the breakouts. With that, let me turn it over to Melanie McClare of SquirrelTech. Melanie, and I'll just remind you to unmute your microphone when you come on.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie McClare. I'm the CEO of SquirrelTech. At SquirrelTech, we recognize that the future of wastewater treatment is both decentralized and flexible. And we unlock opportunities for customers to reuse their wastewater with the vision of net zero wasted water. All industries use an immense amount of water for their processing, especially food and beverage. And at SquirrelTech, we've created a proprietary membrane technology that uses an age-old technology like membranes, but we manipulate the fluid mechanics to make it work better, get more for less energy, and operate under harsher environments. We're interested in the toughest streams of wastewater, and we've had success in reusing wastewater from everything from sewage to food and beverage to oil and gas industries. We offer a wastewater as a service business model, so customers can use the product when they need it, where they need it, especially with seasonal plays, which is really important in the ag sector. Some of our early customers are here in the food and bev sector. We're really excited about this sector and helping these customers reuse water. Come see me in the breakout session if you have time. Thanks.
Terrific. And I'll remind people that the entrepreneurs will also be around in the expo. So with that, let me open it up to Chris Babbings of AgVisor Pro. Chris, are you ready?
Yes. Good morning, Jason, and good morning, everyone. AgVisor Pro is on a mission to connect the world to its experts in any vertical that requires specific knowledge. We're currently utilizing this concept in agriculture, but the concept could work in other industries like the energy sector, for example, in the future. At its core, AgVisor Pro puts you in front of someone who knows what the heck they're talking about. Connections are made inside the platform through audio and video sessions, and revenues come from a percentage of the session transaction, as well as through the subscriptions paid by corporate partners, and through the development of white labels for larger companies. Since March of 2020, we've won several innovation awards, have over 1,500 users, closed a seed round, and have well-known publicly traded companies paying for our product. Our team is diverse in age, gender, and background, and has the experience in building a two-sided marketplace across different languages. AgVisor Pro will be the global go-to source for connecting the world to its experts, advancing long-term sustainable food production and farm viability. And I'd love to tell you more in the breakout sessions.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And we are live and back. Very exciting morning, very intense, lots of content. But I thank you all for staying with us. I see that we've had consistently somewhere between 80 and 150 people on deck. And now we're coming into the final yards. Very compelling presentation from Bill Whitelaw, a fellow traveler, communicator, and integrator of interesting ideas. Let me do a proper introduction for Bill in just a moment, but I'll just invite people to take a moment to fill out the polls that have been launched. So you look in the poll menu, you'll see that we're asking people to let us know how what they thought of the event and whether or not they would recommend it to other people. So please take a moment to do that. And in the interim, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Bill Whitelaw to present today. Bill is Managing Director of Strategy and Business Development for Geologic Systems and JWN Energy. In addition to his own entrepreneurial track record, he serves with a variety of industry organizations, including the Canadian Society for Unconventional Resources, the Energy Futures Lab, and Agriculture for Life, a leading voice in the promotion of agriculture, food, health, and safety education. Bill, thank you for joining us. We look to you to help us unpack convergence in the context of the very hot topic of ESG across both energy and ag.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Just some sort of nuanced additional background. Up until recently, JWN Energy was part of a larger portfolio company that included a large agricultural practice that I oversaw in terms of business units like Weather Innovation and Ag in Motion and a broad range of publications and other tools for the agricultural sector. And so I come at this from a passion for both sectors. Even now with our blended company of Geologic Systems and JWN Energy, we're still very pleased to be able to participate in conversations like this. And so the theme of my conversation, to be mildly provocative and then also to pick up on some of the themes that the great panel and my good friends Sasha and Jason, who I've had many conversations about this subject matter, and it's called Growing Forward Together. And it really poses the question, is it possible, based on a history of peaceful coexistence for Alberta's agricultural sectors and energy sectors, to be more collaborative as we navigate a very complex future in terms of policy pressures, regulatory pressures, investor pressures, public pressures, and both sectors share those things in common. And so the lens that I'll look at this through from is an ESG performance, but in the spirit of today's conversation, brought to you by Foresight and other partners, it's what's the missing letter in ESG and T, and the T stands for technology, and it's the proposition that I would put forward over the next few minutes is the idea around how tech can be the binding catalyst to produce what I call the next generation Albertascape advantage. And the linkage between Growing Forward Together is a commitment by both sectors to be more collaborative than we've been in the past, even though we have a very good, as Jason pointed out, we've got a very good track record of from time to time collaborating on important issues. So next. So, you're here because you understand the technology, and it was phenomenal to sit in and listen to some of the pitches and the contexts. And so I'm not going to talk about the technology per se, because you all get what the opportunity is. And this is really about sort of thinking about the larger narrative into which the tech narrative can be synchronized, and in that way capture the imaginations of all those external stakeholders that I talked about. And so I started to think about this actively a number of years ago, and I was doing a sort of a dog and pony show presentation called Fracking in Feedlots and Why Aren't We Smarter About Water? And I'll come to that more in as I unpack some of this stuff. But it was the idea that I would show an aerial image of a Southern Alberta feedlot and then juxtaposed with an aerial image of a Montney completions job. And then I would talk about, from a data perspective, the volumes of water being used. And I would pose the question, is there an opportunity for better joint stewardship over our water resource? And that fit into an ESG context, because what we're anticipating is water is drafting right behind emissions in terms of, and that'll be important part of this narrative, in terms of ESG performance. So I'll talk a little bit about the current state of each of the sectors, but then I'm going to be sort of, again, mildly provocative about our own roadblocks. I'm also going to touch on the human resource funnel, which is a critically important dimension for organizations like Olds College, for example, in terms of it. And I'll conclude with some observations by saying, is the net zero reality of our world today the actual catalyst that needs to bring the sectors together? So next. Thank you very much, Kurt. And it's funny, we do a lot of work in the ESG space. My title has actually changed, so I'm the Managing Director of Strategy and Sustainability for our joint company. And in that, we do a lot of work in ESG. We do coursework, online training. We do a lot of data work. We help companies understand their ESG strategies. But one of the things we always try and surface is technology is the foundation on which the three letters often sit. And it's sound tech that actually allows you to execute a strong environmental performance dynamic. It's good tech that allows you to have strong governance on behalf of investors and other stakeholders. It's great tech that allows you to be the social performer. And so the idea of just elevating and playing with the alphabet is just a way of getting the points across. So the reality is both sectors are at key technological inflection points. And you heard a ton of that this morning in terms of the exciting opportunities. And both sectors have vibrant and vital innovation ecosystems thriving. And I marvel at some of the creativity. And this is not unique to Alberta. This is a Western Canadian thing. But it's phenomenal how people are bringing their big brains to some of the complex challenges we face. And as a result, you've got this incredibly strong ecosystem in both sectors that should be fused differently. And, but from a timing perspective, when we think about what's happened in the last 17, 18 months in terms of the pandemic, for both sectors, it created a bit of a change in normal operations and a bit of a vacuum. And into that, the whole conversation around sustainability and ESG really poured, I think, in a very positive way. And, but the result of it is we come to terms with thinking around, oh, gosh, both sectors have tremendous sustainability pressures on them, but within those pressures are a whole pile of opportunities. But I think a lot about GHGs and water as two examples, and pose the question: is it ag tech and energy tech that linking catalyst we need in that net zero context? So next slide, thank you. So just very, very quickly, part of this is about narratives and narrative building and understanding how narratives compete with each other. And I always like to say this about Elon Musk and how he has set the tone for narratives. But if you flip it on itself, Tesla is merely a mining company that happens to produce electric vehicles, right? But he's managed the narrative that, in a way, sort of doesn't ever deny that it's a mining company in terms of all the raw products that go into the production of a Tesla vehicle. But he's let that resource sector and the technology dynamics in it ride side by side. And so in upstream oil and gas, which I'm day-to-day involved in, we're entering into a new period of everybody says, well, are we going to recover? Commodity prices are up, they're very strong, and they're continuing to strengthen. The reality is that you are entering a period of what I call ruthless stability. All the companies and their oilfield service providers are focused on operational efficiency writ large, and that whether that's producing great ESG performance or provide good shareholder value creation performance, it's going to characterize the next 5 to 10 years. And if those of you who follow the headlines, you know that we are contracting as a sector. And so if you look at companies like Tourmaline that over the last 18 months have acquired a lot of the other gas players in Alberta's Montney, that will be typical of what we're going to see in terms of ongoing industry consolidation. And when you pair this, and this is an important dynamic, is we're working at substantially reduced workforces within our sector. And that's created abundance of tech talent that's walking the streets. And that's real opportunity that I'll come to in a few minutes around the opportunity for agriculture to dip into a very highly trained workforce with predisposed to think from a tech perspective. And then the other reality for upstream oil and gas is energy systems transition is well in place and it's gaining momentum, and it's an important momentum. And if you think about agriculture and the agri-food sector, it's just a big energy system with all kinds of complexities and lots of chat on the panel discussion about the value chain and the supply chain. But fundamentally, agri-food is an energy system. And it has to be considered that in terms of playing the role that it deserves to play in the overall energy transitions narratives. So we saw during the pandemic that agri-food's importance moved really into the spotlight, and people thought about the stability and security of food supply in a different way. When a lot of the stuff that we would take for granted as Albertans and as Canadians, that all of a sudden we realize, oh, this is built on a great system, but that system, we need to pay attention to it in terms as consumers, as to take responsibility over the role we're going to play in helping evolve that system in terms of the way as consumers we think about what we want out of the system. But at the same time, and we saw this in a lot of our work in Glacier's agricultural group, is we suffer from this human supply chain dynamic. Is we're not effective enough in terms of recruiting next generation leaders and workers into to sustain the opportunities that the sector has. So next. Perfect. But so here's the mildly provocative part. We've got this phenomenal opportunity in front of us as a province, as a jurisdiction, to be able to stand up and say to the world, from an ESG and T perspective, our two sectors are collaborating on the most important challenges of our generation, and that we have an opportunity to sort of declare that not only to the rest of Canada, but to the world in terms of being able to, develop a unique approach that not only produces results domestically, but is capable of exporting those competencies to other jurisdictions around the world. But we do have some problems, sort of leveraging that. So we have big opportunities, but we have a small population, right? And often that population punches above its weight. But when you travel Alberta, as I get the privilege of doing quite frequently, we have a lot of solitudes in Alberta. When I lived in Lethbridge, for example, for many years, people would say, well, I'm going north. And I said, where are you going? Well, we're going to a slow pitch tournament in Red Deer. And then I'd be up in Grand Prairie, and people said, we're going south. We're going to a golf tournament in Lacombe. We don't understand how our own solitudes from north to south and east to west, and their geographical solitudes, their sectoral solitudes, cultural solitudes. We don't understand how that impacts our ability to mobilize as a province and as a jurisdiction. So that's one of the bridges we have to cross in terms of connecting the dots between the Calgarys and the Edmontons and the Grand Prairies and the Medicine Hats of the world and Lethbridges of the world and everywhere in between. And so then there's a reality of Alberta's own solitude within the Federation of Canada, right? And so for those of you who get to travel outside or have family in Ontario or BC, you know that the reality of there is a range of anti-Alberta narratives out there that remain from a fairly passive but to a very aggressive narrative. And from when you're on the outside looking in, sometimes you might ask yourself, is Alberta its own echo chamber, right? In terms of, and how do we use the opportunities that ag tech and energy tech to escape velocity, if you will, from our own echo chamber. And then sometimes, quite honestly, in Alberta, we have a penchant to shoot ourselves in our own feet in terms of things like the foreign funding of the anti-oil challenge. They don't do us very good as we're prying, our own internal narratives sometimes compete with our real desire to get outside of ourselves and speak better to the rest of the world. So I just wanted to leave these out here for you to reflect on as Albertans, and know that you all have your own personal experiences of these things to say, oh, as part of this community of practice, how do we think about these in an opportunistic and constructive kind of way to tell a different set of stories? And I think the ag tech, energy tech intersection story is a very, very powerful one. So next slide. Thank you, Kurt. And one of the other things that I think a lot about, and this is, if we're going to take advantage of this opportunity, one of the things we have to do is make sure we have the human resources foundation on which to build these next generation opportunities. And so Jason and I and Sasha and others were part of an ongoing conversation is how do you take advantage of all the engineering and geoscience talent that has been cast out through some of that consolidation activity that I mentioned earlier. And so, they're 80% of the way into the journey to ag tech. Sensors are a common thing, for example. And so we've got this huge opportunity to, and there's lots of activity going on to do this, is to leverage that oil and gas talent and pull it into the sector, into the ag tech sector quite a ways. And that's my point about that's a big harvest opportunity. It's a short-term opportunity because a lot of the talent is sort of middle-aged and beyond, but it actually sets up the stage for us then to be more compelling as we think about recruiting in both sectors to next generation leadership. So wonderful programs like Kevin Krausert's Avatar Innovation are thinking actively about how do we recruit? How do we compel people to come in? And so part of that narrative change maybe is, We're just a technology company that grows canola. We're a tech company that produces transition fuels. So when we think about the things that matter to the ESG generation, and that's, we all know all the promising leaders and workers that are in there, we can, by changing that narrative and being able to talk about the important environmental performance and social performance things that we're considering as sectors, that could really unlock a lot of value in terms of the perception among many young folks that these are legacy industries, and they're not compelling for me to spend the next 30 years or 35 years of my career, or quite the opposite is true. And because the reality is, if we're going to have a very successful energy systems transition point of view, it's going to be built on the strength of that ESG generation. So that's one of the big opportunities and challenges we face as two sectors, is how do we keep that human resources pipeline full? How do we attract the right talent where they can make a difference in terms of, and the ESG dynamic is really, I think, the big hook to compel people to come into the industry and say, not only do you get better performance, but you get to play with some wonderful technologies that are enabling that performance. And so just as I navigate toward the end, in the next slide, is one of the things when we have these conversations about ag tech and energy tech meeting is that we do need to honor a long history in Alberta and Western Canada of ag and energy working collaboratively on things. But it was more on sort of an ad hoc project-based kind of approach to things. And it really sort of flowed under the radar of public perception. And I think if we think, what is the catalyst for organizations like Foresight and others to be able to compel a consistent collaboration, where folks at Olds College are talking to the engineering department at Schulich, for example, and that we sort of sow the seeds of our own success. And so I think a lot about the net zero times that we live in. And I think, is net zero and all of that entails a path forward for ag tech and energy tech and those two sectors to be more collaborative and to be more thoughtful about producing coherent and measurable results that good collaboration can produce. And both sectors are thinking a lot about this. At Ag for Life, for example, that Jason referenced, this is a big conversation for us, is how do we help our members and our community of practice navigate the net zero world? So I think the net zero path forward can be sort of thought about as a platform that's safe and a current platform for all the stakeholders to come on and have the conversations that allow us to synchronize and synthesize efforts as appropriate. We were doing our own Growing Forward Together series of summits last year, and we had wonderful engagement where people like Karen Schuett from Livestock Water Recycling was fully engaged with energy people. And as they discussed both the possibilities and the potential, but also were very honest about the roadblocks. And so just in conclusion here, as Albertans and as technology advocates and energy folks and ag folks, is net zero the platform that we can think about that brings together these two sectors, that brings together the wonderful organizations like the University of Calgary and Olds and University of Alberta and the Foresights of the world and the EPACs of the world and the CAPs of the world, where we can actually say, what do we need to say to ourselves, to the rest of Canada, and to the world about the opportunities that ESG and T bring together, where companies that are providing, using water stewardship as an example, where they're providing great technologies to the industrial fracking community, and at the same time they're helping the livestock community manage water and be better stewards at it. So with that, I'll close and just think actively about ESG and T. It was a wonderful panel and a set of perspectives on a broad range of issues, from financing to building great governance boards and that sort of thing. It's all part of a very complex ecosystem, but I think both sectors have a lot to share with each other experientially as we map towards a new Alberta advantage. So thank you, Jason.
Well, and thank you, Bill. I love the idea of moving towards a new Alberta advantage, recognizing that we're down to the final yards. Is there one call to action that you have, Bill, in terms of what people who are participating today should do on Monday that would advance a kind of aligned agenda between the two sectors?
Well, shameless self-promotion for Foresight. What it needs is somebody to sort of pick up the banner and get on the Don Quixote donkey and ride off and say, what's possible? Well, conversations like this are part of the narrative building process and the synchronization process. So it really needs an organization like Foresight to say, we are that safe platform. We are that catalyst around which we can build a next generation Alberta advantage that's based on sustainability performance and not tax advantages, right? And I want to be very clear about that is Alberta will succeed in a global context based on its environmental, social, and governance performance. So.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for sharing your many years of accumulated wisdom in doing that deep dive on ESG for the province. A few takeaways for me today have been that both sectors are at technological and ESG inflection points around things like digitization, GHGs and net zero targets, the need to deliver measurable results. I think we heard this morning about energy as a market for fuels such as renewable natural gas, for carbon offsets, for sink capacity of various kinds, as well as agriculture as a market for energy-related technologies, as we see people leverage technology platforms and skilled people from companies like Zedi or Questor, who are who've built out technologies in the oil and gas space, but are bringing them into the ag sector. A comment in the chat earlier around the need for courageous pilots, that we've done a lot around that space in energy, that maybe we need to do more to really commercialize novel technology deployment in the ag space as well. And then the opportunity to learn from financing models in the energy space, and to bring that competence into the ag sector. Well, it's definitely an area of strong interest, I think, for everyone. I'll remind everyone that Foresight is launching AgriNext, which will be our platform, perhaps, to do what Bill is challenging us to do, which is really to mobilize the sector and the customers earlier in the life of the entrepreneurs, and to align some of the support and acceleration to really help commercialize these technologies more rapidly, and to provide that early customer voice to the entrepreneurs as they validate their assumptions. With that, thank you, Bill, and for all of you for joining us today. I'd like to encourage people to click under the event tab in their Hopin. You'll see in there a poll. It would be very valuable to us if you take a few minutes to just respond to the questions there around what you thought of the event. And of course, whether or not you'd like a follow-on introduction to any of the ventures that pitched today. And I'd like to thank each of them individually and collectively for taking the time to present today, to really show off the capabilities in Alberta's ag tech sector so brilliantly. So thank you, all of our entrepreneurs, as well as to our great speakers and panelists. Let me ask Kurt, if you wouldn't mind, to just advance the slides. We have a number of events coming up that are being hosted by Foresight's partners and ecosystem friends related to ag tech. In particular, if you turn to the next slide, you'll see that the Ag Tech Innovation Summit is coming up next week, as is the Global Food Forum. And then if we turn to the next slide following, you'll see that with our partner SVG Ventures, we're able to offer everyone who is attending today complimentary access to the Forbes Future of Food Summit. And I'll just ask that we, maybe I can paste that into the chat here so that people can take advantage of that. That is a very exciting global conference on the future of food, and covers many of the same questions that we are here. Oops. But in particular on emerging technologies. And then finally, we recently, and next slide, we recently launched at Foresight a beta of our membership-based venture community, building on the membership model that Actia had established here in Alberta. So if you're a clean tech entrepreneur or venture and want to benefit from exclusive events focused on founders, CEOs, CTOs, access to discounts for events and other things, mentoring hours from Foresight's roster of over 80 venture advisors across Canada, government policy insights and other opportunities for voice, peers, and other support. Please check that link out. You'll see it in the slide there. And then next slide, please. Our community of innovators, which is free for anyone to join. Anyone who is interested in clean tech in Canada, you'll get the latest on events, innovation challenges, thought leadership, and the rest in the clean tech ecosystem. I'd like to take a moment to do a final thank you to our sponsors, to Borden Ladner Gervais, ATB Financial, Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership and Western Economic Diversification Canada. And finally, I'd like to recognize the terrific team behind today's event, which includes, and feel free to turn on your cameras if you can, folks, but Andrea Bravo, Kurt Archer, Astrid Nunez, Lee Kang, Tony Dhaliwal, Karen Spears, Michelle Hunt, Michelle Zasluk, and to recognize, of course, our terrific and outgoing Alberta Director, Sydney Shalander, who has done so much personally to build Actia, Foresight, and the clean tech sector here in this province. A reminder, you still have time to check out the Expo site and connect with the ventures and our other partners, including Innovation Guelph, and we'll be leaving this open until noon. Thank you all. Have a great, healthy summer, and all the best.